Hello, welcome again. This is Michael Scherini from Scherini Lawyers. I'm here today with Tab. How you doing, Tab?
Doing very well, Michael. How are you?
Good, good. Did you want to tell me a little bit about, introduce yourself to the people watching and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I run a company called Obsidian Wealth Management. We're based here in Melbourne, Victoria, but we service clients Australia-wide. The main thing we do is essentially help professionals and business owners optimize wealth and achieve their version of financial independence. So our conversations are quite in-depth and the solutions we put in place are quite bespoke and tailored to the client situation, depending on what their vision is. We like to set systems and frameworks in place for us to make it as easy as possible for them to be able to achieve their goals.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, well, today I've invited you on. I wanted to get someone from outside of the legal industry and I wanted to touch base with issues facing business owners. The last two episodes we've spoken to a couple of lawyers, and I really appreciate you coming along. We want to simplify complex legal issues for people out there listening. Want to break down the law into plain English, and I think today it's really good to have you on so I can get some insights about your business and things that you've been facing recently. You obviously have a very interesting role to do with asset strategy and wealth management and helping people grow their wealth. And myself being predominantly a commercial litigator and commercial lawyer, also practicing in property leasing, building construction, employment occasionally. I've got the benefit of seeing quite a wide variety of clients and issues and businesses. What about yourself? Who are you mainly working with these days? What kind of clients?
Yeah, look, it's mainly around the professional and business owner space. And you're absolutely right. You know, when it comes to business owners in particular and how they run their operation, structure is key, right? And if you don't get that right from the start, it could lead to a lot of issues when it comes to risk mitigation, asset protection. So longevity is important for us to consider, and it's also important for the business owners to understand what sort of impact they're looking to make, how big they want their business to grow, what scaling looks like, and also exit as well, and making sure that there's connectivity across the board. But mainly it comes down to managing risk at the end of the day, right? You being a business owner would know it's something that we need to factor in. So these are the main areas of our conversation. But at the same time, look, it's important for business owners to actually get a grasp of what it is that they are working towards. And that clarity, certainty, and confidence in that respect is an important trait to have as a business owner. And you'd be surprised as to how many actually lack that level of insight. So it's up to us to make sure that we're guiding the clients and educating them to be able to have that level of certainty and be able to execute with confidence.
Yeah, and you talked about risk. Now, when you talk about risk, I would presume that you would be recommending clients to sort of engage with a lawyer even through your processes at some points to handle the legal side of things because obviously legal professionals are legally trained just to have that extra layer of protection so that they can, I suppose, make sure that they're covering off all points. We don't necessarily expect every business to be able to touch on the deepest level of understanding of the law that can be expected of someone who's legally trained. But yourself, you would obviously have an understanding of the general areas of risk and where you want your clients to address them and protect themselves. But putting it into place, it really does require legal assistance. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. You know, I think from the client's perspective, it comes down to having the right team around them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm only a part of that equation. Of course, from a strategic perspective, we are more than capable of setting the frameworks and the strategies in place. But in order to actually implement and bring it together, I need your expertise. But at the same time, you know, we leverage off of family lawyers, sometimes wills and estates, mainly people like yourself when it comes to business owners mainly. So absolutely, I think it's a team effort at the end of the day, and that cohesiveness is very, very important to make sure that we're achieving the best outcomes for our clients.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's great. I agree. I think, and it's important to have a good network of professionals, not just for the clients, but for us as lawyers and for you as wealth managers, because the bigger, the broader your network is of reliable, trustworthy people, the better you can service your clients. There's nothing better than being able to tell your clients, I can send you to my friend or my associate that I know that works in this area. I know they're capable. I know that they're competent. I know they're reliable. So we're always trying to forge relationships with more business professionals that we can refer our clients to for all their legal needs, all of their personal needs, no matter what area it's in, whether it's an accountant, wealth manager, or any other kind of profession. I think it's important, like you said, to have a team around you as a client, but also have a team around you as a business owner so that you can make sure your clients are put in good hands when it's something that's outside of your area of expertise. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think it comes down to the client as well to be able to recognize the value of having the right advisors in your corner. It just allows you to be a lot more effective in terms of how quickly you're going to go down that path you want to undertake, by minimizing mistakes, by making sure that yeah, you're leveraging on the experts to make sure that you have that competitive edge. Because I've seen it time and time again when clients do try to do it themselves, often with the other responsibilities that they have going on in their lives, such as family, kids, fitness, whatever else you may have on your plate, it is quite challenging to get it right. And leveraging on the right expertise in those moments is priceless, and also allows you to stay extremely competitive in the marketplace and, most importantly, meet your goals as a business owner.
I would say that clients are more likely to save cost down the road and minimize their risk if they engage a professional early. Now, it may cost some money up front, but trying to do your own documents, plan your own legal matters yourself, draft your own documents, they're generally not going to be legally compliant. They're going to lack things like certainty. It's going to, the formation of the contract. There's all sorts of elements that may be missing that make a legally binding contract. As an example, like I'm just giving that one example that, drafting a contract for yourself without a lawyer, it carries a lot of risk. But it could be any legal documents or any sort of legal matters that you're trying to deal with yourself. It's really going to potentially cost you more down the line if that document
100%.
or a situation is found to have been done in a, improper way.
100%. I mean, look, price is of the cost aspect is of course a factor, but we need to be able to look beyond it, right? It's just one piece of the puzzle, and ultimately, if you're able to resolve those things early on, in the long run, the benefits are absolutely priceless. Yeah, so I think we need to be able to be capable enough to look beyond the price barrier. Ultimately, it's about the value. That's the most important thing. And the value that you get is what's going to give you a competitive edge to not only operate, but to also make a very strong impact in the work that you're doing as a business owner.
Yeah, that's right. And you talked about risk before, and I wondered if you had any examples of any clients recently that you can think of um, involved in risky behavior, or where you recommended that they do something in particular or see a lawyer.
So I think the main thing that we see is the use of a trust. Yeah. So depending on the actual company structure itself, depending on if you're operating as a sole trader, at that point you are quite exposed to a lot of risk. And I see that as you are taking those progressive steps, coming up with the right structure for your business, whether that be through a company or through a trust, and making sure that is relevant to your future goals. So, common uses of trust, for example, again, comes down to asset protection, but it could also tie into estate planning, managing tax, because it allows you to distribute to beneficiaries. And also when it comes to partnership agreements, right? So setting in place buy-sell agreements, shareholder agreements. Now, all of these things fall part of the strategic conversation, but in terms of actually setting up, particularly when it comes to trusts and the estate planning side of things, we need a lawyer's support to be able to do that, right? So we can give the advice, but in terms of actual execution and implementation, we need the lawyers on board to be able to coordinate with them to achieve the best possible outcome for the client.
Yeah, well, look, I think the reality is when it comes to tax and so forth, they really need to engage with an accountant if there's nothing wrong with lawfully minimizing tax where it's legal. However, it's really an area that sort of falls within the expertise of an accountant, as example. I've had situations myself recently where you know families have been stuck with a situation where a director of a company has died and he's had no structure in place. They've had to go to court to get orders just to get access to business bank accounts and so forth because he didn't have the structures in place, didn't have any kind of planning in place, didn't have any alternative persons appointed under any documents to be able to have access and control upon his death and so forth. So I think you need to think about as well if you're an owner of a business and you were to die tomorrow, because it can happen to any of us at any time, and no one's immune. And you need to consider: do you have your affairs in order? Like, do you have powers of attorney that kick in, as an example? That could be useful. What does your share if you've got a shareholder agreement with other partners in your business? What does a shareholder agreement say about the situation where you die? Does it give your loved ones, people close to you, a right to take over and have control of your shareholdings and so forth? Those are common things you need to think about, because if you die, these things can start to go very pear-shaped. So you need to make sure that you've got your affairs in order, because otherwise, not only does it create legal issues for your family, who then have to maybe go to court to get orders, but it also leads to potentially costly litigation with other partners in your business and so forth. And these are the things that people need to think about. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're a sole director or the sole shareholder of your company, you need to make sure that you got measures in place, because if you, God forbid, pass away or if you're injured, then everything comes to a halt, right? In fact, a couple of years ago, this happened to a client of mine who owned a coffee shop, right? He had employees and commitments to suppliers, and he ended up in a situation where he was terminally ill and couldn't operate the business anymore. And the family actually had to apply to Supreme Court and needed the help of their lawyers for letters of administration. And during that time, the business essentially froze. Took about 6 weeks for everything to execute and a new director to be appointed. But by then it was too late. The business was already in critical condition. It couldn't sustain. And that's just an effect of poor planning and the consequences of it. So yeah, you need to
Yeah,
get
and
these things right from the beginning.
that's right. And you have clients leaving that period who can't wait, who might have urgent matters. So it's quite devastating, and devastating to the reputation of the business as well. No one wants to have that situation. So, people need to think about, common things, even areas that we don't work in too much depth unless we're really required to. But let's think about things like: is there a will? Simple. Is the company covered in the will? You know, I touched on before about powers of attorney. Can one kick in at a certain point upon a certain thing happening, like a death or so forth? Um, and that's these are the main issues. I think, yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult if you haven't got your structures in place. And then you also got to think about things like: is superannuation automatically part of your estate or not? Who's named in that as a beneficiary? And then you've got to think about things like: have you got insurance in place for your death, for your company or for yourself personally? What kind of risks insurance? Is all sorts. Um, you know,
And you
uh,
need to also try and separate the two, right? I mean, your personal life versus the actual business. These are, of course, quite confronting conversations to have early on. But yeah, you've pointed out so rightly how important they are. Yeah, having these deeds in place, succession planning, all of these equations tying together. And, that's where we come in to make sure that we put the right frameworks in place to address all of these things. But I think it also a duty of care also has to fall on the client, to be able to take that initiative to want to take those steps. I think a lack of awareness is something that's really out there, and we need to do our best to try and get that message across to try and get people on the right track as soon as possible.
a regular review and consistent diarized system of making sure the documents you got in place are updated, current, relevant to your circumstances, your business circumstances, financial circumstances, maybe it's just a yearly review. You could do it yourself if you're familiar with the documents and you've gotten advice from your lawyer previously. You don't even necessarily have to engage, but obviously it would be better for people to come and review their situation with their lawyer, or even if it was their wealth manager from year to year, because your circumstances change, your desires change, the world changes. You got the emergence of different things like cryptocurrency, assets, and all sorts of stuff coming in, AI. So, the world is changing, and you need to make sure your affairs are current to the world as it is at the time.
Yeah, you got to be nimble, right? And you touched on superannuation, and when you're young, you never think of it. But in all honesty, I mean, the importance of it when you address it early on. Firstly, it's also a non-estate asset. So when it comes back to the topic of risk, it's just going to put an extra layer of protection there. And if you get it right from the beginning, it's going to set you up to at least have a few million by the time you retire. The early you get that right from the beginning, because I think the thing that many people don't realize is that you actually have full control of how you optimize your retirement nest egg. And you can, of course, have insurances through that. And also make sure that that goes well in hand with the outside super investment activities, the business activities, the lifestyle opportunities, and everything that ties into it. It's an invaluable exercise, and you need to leverage those conversations from the beginning to be able to have that right system in place.
That's right. So it's basically where legal and financial strategy must align. It's not just about having documents, but making sure they work together. And that comes back to my point that I made previously about making sure that you're with good professionals. Make sure those professionals work together, have a good relationship, and work together well. Because if they do, you're going to have a much better outcome for your personal affairs across different areas.
Yeah, I think alignment in values is key, right? Not just between the actual client, but also the professionals in their network that they consider part of their team. Because ultimately, if I was to send you a client, I would consider you as an extension of myself. And so that service and the quality of output is continued. And that continuity is, of course, quite necessary for the client to get the best possible outcome. And that understanding between everyone being on the same page, helping us deliver upon the client's expectations. And all of these factors need to be considered. There needs to be transparency as well. Um, so that understanding is absolutely important. You hit the nail on the head.
Really, we need to keep reminding ourselves to be on top of these things. I can think of one situation where um, we had a client die, and the spouse didn't realize that there was an ATO claim. The ATO claim was actually against the company, but commonly tax debts and certain types of tax debts can pierce the corporate veil of the company, because it wasn't, for example, structured correctly in this situation. So that actually ended up with quite a large claim against the estate. So the children and the widow had thought they were going to inherit quite a lot of money, ended up being quite minimal. That could have been that could have really been minimised by obviously having good wealth managers to help you with your assets, having good accountants to be on top of it, and perhaps those things weren't in place during the business's operation, and it allowed it to get out of hand because this person didn't have good professionals around them, warning and protecting them from these things by making and make good decisions. And in this situation, it was very sad for me to see, and unfortunately, that was a great example of why when you're around, make sure you do things properly, because you really don't want to leave your family in that situation. It's quite horrible for us to see as lawyers. We take no, we take nothing out of that except for sadness. And yeah, it's really just a great reminder to get your affairs in order when you're alive and think about it a bit more.
Yeah, look, I think the ownership structure is just as important as tax planning, right? We as professionals need to be able to have the tough conversations, because when push comes to shove, disputes, creditors, contesting, All of these things appear from nowhere, right? Family members who you didn't know existed just all of a sudden appear out of nowhere. So we need to be able to have those questions, and I think the clients need to have the courage to be able to address it. And it's when you take those precautionary measures where example, just like what you just provided, can be avoided. And even another important thing is making sure that the ownership the structures align. Between, let's say, if you're owning an asset through a trust, the actual title also, both of them needs to match. I had a case last year where one of my clients owned a warehouse through a trust, and she was in a little bit of debt, owed a six-figure sum of 400K to a couple of creditors, and had no money to pay for it. And they essentially had to go through the personal route because there was no alignment or any sort of protective measures in place. The title was in her own name for the actual warehouse, and it wasn't actually owned through the trust. So she was personally liable and had to fork out the cash herself. And that really pretty much, up until this day, has still crippled her business activities. And it all came down to poor planning, right? And you don't want to essentially let it get to that point. And there's hundreds of cases. I'm sure mutual clients who would be listening to this would know people in their own networks that have gone through or experienced similar situations, which are, just like you pointed out, very sad when push comes to shove. But at the same time, it can be avoided with the right planning and conversations.
Yeah, no, I think also I've got to think about putting it in another perspective. You know, say you don't die, but you get really sick. The realities of this world where it can happen randomly and suddenly. What if you don't have transition documents or terms in your documents that exist to allow you to transition out when you don't have capacity, or when you lose capacity? Are your books employer investor ready? Like, are they going to be properly prepared in a way that people can go and read those documents and say, I'll make a choice as to whether or not I can buy um, your shares or buy your business or so forth. Even fellow partners or shareholders that might be able to buy your part out. You got to think about having transition documents that don't necessarily even relate to situations of death, but they might even relate to you retiring when you might have just slowed down and you no longer have the ability to perform at your best because you've aged. And that is a common thing that I see as well. And we're all going to get old. So we need to think that we're not going to necessarily be as sharp as we were when we were in our mid 30s, when we were in our power, and we need to think about, do we have the books and records in place? Do we have the documents in place that enable smooth transitions? Because I've seen handshakes go horribly wrong, especially when one director wants out and the other one doesn't for whatever reason. It might be death, sorry, not death. It might be retirement or an illness, and because they haven't had the proper documents in place, for example, like buyout clauses and so forth in shareholders agreements and so forth, there's been no mechanism to allow them out easily. And quite often, I've also seen situations where um, basically the other people that are, for example, you might have two or three other shareholders, they just string it out and wait until the person who wants out is desperate, and then they basically have to sell out at a loss because there's no mechanics of buyouts, there's no valuation clauses, there's nothing like this that should exist, and so that's why I always say to people that a shareholders agreement is an extremely important document if you've got
Mm.
other people that own the business with you, because that document, if it's done poorly, is useless. If it's done properly by a lawyer, knows what they're doing, a commercial lawyer, it can be an excellent document that can help you just on the business point alone. So I always say to people, think ahead, but make sure not just you got your documents in order, but make sure that they're done by professionals because they need to be capable of being interpreted, clear, certain. Otherwise, quite frankly, they're useless.
Yeah, look, I think it's also important to consider the culture of the organization as well. If the directors are going at it, how is it going to actually affect the performance of the business, culture, and ultimately profitability? Some solutions that we as advisors get involved in is setting up buy-sell agreements for shareholder protection, right? So these documents are legally binding, right? So it does protect the individual in the event of death, disability, illness, or if they leave. It's usually backed by an insurance payout that pretty much allows the other partner to buy out the deceased or the injured person's estate. Another common one is key personal insurance, and you already mentioned the succession deed, shareholder agreements. All of those things can be leveraged to essentially minimize that risk component. But ultimately, it comes down, bottom line, you need to take action. Yeah, there's solutions out there. There's measures that we can put in place to make sure that that profitability and continuity carries on. But you need to get these done from the beginning. But the most important thing is that solutions are available to make sure that those things can be avoided, because when they do happen, it's very, very sad to see. And we know that it can be avoided, right? Like if it was raining outside, you wouldn't go up without a coat unless you want to be drenched. You know what the consequences are. So we just had to be smart enough to be willing to take action towards it.
Yeah, look, I think the reality is, as a client, if you've built something worth protecting, it really takes the right legal and financial framework. So, um, I think for us, if today's discussion has raised any red flags with anyone watching, about your financial situation, that we can refer you to someone who's a professional in the field that you need, or your legal documents need to be reviewed, or you need legal documents drafted and your structure reviewed. That's something we can help you with. If you're caught up in any litigation, tricky situations at the moment, and any of the examples that we've mentioned about illness, around death, widowed persons, and family, or families dealing with a deceased parent, or anyone else, for that matter, really just give us a call. We're quite happy to chat to you. And if it's not something that we work in or that we're comfortable doing, we've got a wealth of very reliable lawyers and professionals out there that will put you in touch with someone we know personally. So we'll make sure you're taken care of.
Yeah, look, I think we've covered off on some very important points. It's also important to point out to not to neglect the superannuation piece. Yeah, because even as a business owner, from a tax minimization perspective, these things are key, right? And the point of being in business, as you rightly pointed out, is to build something worthwhile. And having an exit strategy as well is quite important. And you need to get that dialed in from the very beginning. The earlier the better, right? I mean, what does the exit strategy look like? What am I working towards? Am I going for a 5-year plan, 10, 15, 20? It also gives us something to work towards and continuously refine things along the way by having conversations with yourself, myself, accountant, so on and so forth. But ultimately, all of these things need to be considered. An exit is very much part of that, along with the risk mitigation strategies, superannuation, contractual agreements, shareholder agreements, buy-sell agreements. These things will all essentially make sure that the asset will be protected, the asset's going to be profitable, and most importantly, your lifestyle goals are going to be achieved, and you're going to be able to make a lasting impact as a professional or a business owner in this space.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's been fantastic today, Tav. I really appreciate you coming on.
Pleasure.
I hope to have you on again in the future. I promised you I wouldn't keep you on for too long. I've kept my promise, and I really appreciated the insights from your industry today, and I'm really glad to see that you've got such a broad knowledge of the legal issues touching your business as well. It's really reassuring to know that persons are going to be in good hands with you, and look forward to meeting up with you again for dinner soon. And fantastic having you on. And I wish you have a lovely day.
Thanks, Michael. Pleasure to be here. Thanks again for having me, and looking forward to the next one.